Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have another wonderful guest on today. When are our guests not wonderful? That's all I have to say. But this is going to be a really special presentation. We have the amazing Jason Palmer with us today. How are you, Jason?
Doing great.
Landon and I were just looking at your background. I mean, if you guys are listening on audio, you're missing out because look at this amazing just feng shui. It's just beautiful background that you have there. It looks like you're in the cabin in the woods. Is that where you are?
Basically, yes.
Yeah, we were just talking about the beautiful surroundings where Jason lives. So this is great. So, all right, we will start out. We'll have Landon read Jason's bio, and you guys are going to find this extremely interesting today. I mean, we've talked to Jason back and forth and communicated through email, and we were absolutely intrigued by everything he was sharing with us. And I know that you guys will be too. So go ahead with that bio, Landon. And I think that Jason has a slideshow prepared, and we will dive right in.
Okay, let's go. Jason Palmer, PhD, is a settler anthropologist and a K-12 educator. His work unravels the colonial regimes of race, rationality, religion, and gender. The academic field of Mormon studies is dominated by historians and sociologists. Therefore, since Jason is an anthropologist, his book, Forever Familias, Race, Gender, and Indigeneity in Peruvian Mormonism, released on June 25th, 2024, is one of only a handful of anthropological books about Mormonism. So a lot of big words in there.
Yes.
He's gonna dumb it down for us, I think. But yes, and as everybody knows, or a lot of you know, Landon and I founded and run the Good Book Club for Post and Nuance Mormons. And so we were really intrigued that this book is coming out in just a month. So we want to hear all about that and everything else. So whenever you're ready, Jason, let's share your screen and let's talk.
Yeah, I'll be having a slide about that book in a minute. So let's see if this
pre-order
works.
now, right? That's the bottom line. Let's do this.
Yeah, there's a discount too.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Can you see that slide?
Yep. Yep.
All right. So yeah, I'm an anthropologist of religion, and I've been part of the large, complexly Mormon-ish Familia Peruana depicted in this slide since 2011, and I've been studying Peruvian Mormonism since 2014. That is Inca Cola they're drinking, by the way, not alcohol.
Oh,
I selected Arequipa, Peru, as one of my main anthropological field sites because of the first event on this timeline. In the October 2012 General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, President Thomas S. Monson announced the construction of the Arequipa Peru Temple. It would be Peru's third temple and would reduce the temple travel time of thousands of saints in Peru and Chile by upwards of 36 hours. Many of my Peruvian Mormon study participants reported being stunned by the announcement, brought to tears, overjoyed, and then resolved to become worthy. And I kind of blurred out people's faces for to protect their identity. However, as we can see in the timeline, the groundbreaking didn't occur until 5 years later in March 2017.
That is a big gap. Huh.
So I'm going to start today with that uncharacteristic 5-year delay because the lore that's sprung up to explain it provides a window into the multiple agendas, desires, and visions of those with claims to the land depicted in this photo.
Wow.
Spoiler
and I do
alert.
have to say, we knew that Jason was going to come on and talk about Peru. We'd been talking about this for a while. We were really excited. But then as Jason started, figuring out, those Mormonish characters, all they do is talk about temples. He started kind of revisiting and looking at, temple building in his own area of expertise. And so this is why this is just incredibly fascinating. And you have a slide of cows. I love cows. So we're already off to a great start.
Yeah. And I'm going to get to the point where I tell about how, what reminded me, because one of your episodes actually reminded me about this interview that we're going to read.
It's kind of interesting. I think, is that bullshit in the foreground right there?
Really, Landon?
We're starting right there.
or cow poop,
Cow poop. Okay, well.
Yeah.
Cow pie.
Yeah. So, basically, I mean, spoiler alert, because, one of the explanatory tales that I'm going to tell has to do with Salt Lake City's playbook of, instead of simply choosing another site, silencing local resistance to a temple by means of its vast financial influence upon the world. And so after I tell the story of that little real estate problem, then Rebecca and Landon, you can kind of choose your own adventure through the rest of where you want me to talk about. I could talk about the Moroni statue raising, which was a big deal that occurred in November of 2018. I could talk about the open house in November 2019 or the dedication in December 2019.
Right.
The thing is, I can go on for hours about any of these things and more because I have hundreds of pages of anthropological field notes about my intimate experiences with each of these stages of Zion building in Peru.
Right, which is why you wrote a book. That's exactly it.
But only a handful like Nephi would say, only the 100th part of which made it into the book. And so that's why, here's the book. So,
here we go.
Whatever, Familias, Race, Gender, and Indigeneity in Peruvian Mormonism. So I have like such a huge archive of data related to Peruvian Mormonism that I always try to give a completely different presentation at every speaking engagement or podcast or academic conference that I attend. So get ready for this Mormonish exclusive explanation of the 5-year delay.
Exclusive. Here we go. Now this is great. Everybody pre-order. You did say that it's available for pre-order right now.
It's available for pre-order, and if you go to the Illinois, the University of Illinois Press website, then you get the 30% discount.
So if you put the promo code S24UIP for our list, those that are just listening, S24UIP in the promo code at the press of the University of Illinois. So
you can... and I feel like when I think back to when I was in college and people were being called on missions post high school, in my day, everybody seemed to go to Peru. I mean, now that I'm looking back, I can name so many friends, guys mostly, who ended up in Peru, and even some family members. It just seemed like back then, that decade, like the late 80s, that was the place to go. So I think there will be a lot of interest in this book because I feel a lot of people serve their missions there.
Yeah, and it's also one of I would say it's like the fifth. I have like different metrics for what I call Zion building, but it's basically fifth in the world as far as Zion building, behind the US, Mexico, Brazil, and the Philippines.
Right.
You got Peru. And it's also one of the most active. So the numbers that the church reports as having, Mormons in that certain country are more aligned to reality in Peru than they are in a lot of other countries. So
wow, that's interesting.
And this is interesting to us because when we started talking to Jason, as he said, we'd been talking about temples and the issues in kind of the 5 temples we've been covering in the United States, and we kept running into this RLUIPI law and how the church was out changing building codes or using different tactics to allow the temples where they really should not be. And then when Jason called and said, I had an experience, or I'd been studying this and why it took 5 years. And when I listened to the show, I all of a sudden realized, I think this might be happening in Peru too, that they may be changing in other countries as well as in the US, that they have strategies. So it was interesting to kind of hear this story about the 5 years. And so we wanted Jason to come on and tell about that and see, is this just a US phenomena, or is the church doing this in other locations? Is this an international?
Yeah. And let's get right into it. Cause, so basically for many indigenous people in Arequipa, Peru, this volcano is a god who dominates the skyline. It was a skyline that Yanawara people shaped over 3,000 years ago with terracing and aqueducts, and has been farmed continuously ever since. Today, it is curated by an ethnic group specific to Arequipa called the Lonco people. Their archaeologically rich landscape is protected by Peruvian national laws and is surrounded by signs like this one, which says, Ministry of Culture, Archaeologically Rich Cultural Landscape, Carmen Alto and Tokrawasi Terracing Intangible Archaeological Zone, declared so by Directorial Resolution number blah, blah, blah in 2004, protected by law number blah, 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 National Law of Cultural Patrimony. Despite these laws and signs, the skyline went from this, dominated by Apu Misti, to this, dominated by Apu Morona.
Is
I'm going to
that
tell
to
the story.
scale? That's not photoshopped?
That is not Photoshop. That is a photo that I took
Okay,
in
everybody.
2019.
Honestly, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That was shocking when you went from the one slide to the other. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Now, this is
So,
this is in that area that's national. That sign is
mhm.
saying
It is
it has.
within the, yeah. So the entire area is, there's signs all around it, and it is right in the middle of
What
where it shouldn't be.
would it be compared to like Yellowstone or something? The protections, like a nationally protected. I mean, what can we compare it to so we can
Well, it's not,
understand
yeah, I mean,
how severe the protections are?
yeah, like that's where, um, well, it's not a national park, but
Right.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you would think it's from the Ministry of Culture. It's like
Yeah.
it's a federal protection. So at the federal
Okay.
level, yeah, I'd say it's
Okay.
pretty similar to something like that.
Wow.
And
So
yeah,
federally protected.
and we'll see.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
that's the story of how this happened. And there's, yeah, like I said, a lot of different versions to it, but I'm going to tell you the version that I was told,
Right.
um, from one perspective. But anyway, it's um, yeah. So, and then it's kind of interesting because yeah, so basically, I'm going to tell the story of how a Mormon temple emerged behind the very sign that once prohibited it. And then I took that picture, which is like, there's the sign and
Yeah.
there's the temple behind it. Um,
And so that sign means really nothing. I mean, there even
yeah.
lower buildings were restricted. Like it was a preserved area. Like
Oh yeah.
nothing
So
like that should ever, and what I love about that picture, although I hate it so much, is that it shows people when they say, yeah, the building's not as big as the mountain. It's called dominating the skyline. You know what
yeah.
I mean? Your eye is looking at this gorgeous natural scene and it's just naturally flowing along. And then suddenly, just jarring right there. Of course, the temple's not as big as the mountain. The temple in Lone Mountain is not going to be as big as the mountain. But as far as just dominating the skyline and destroying that natural look and feel of it, that's exactly what happens. This is a
Yeah, and
great
that's what
example of that.
yeah, and that's what's meant by the intangible part of it.
Mm-hmm,
It's not like they can't do things on this land. They're obviously planting crops and everything.
mm-hmm,
It's just that the intangible thing is the view, right?
mm-hmm.
And so that is the part that they were trying to protect with these laws. Um, but anyway, like I said, the story exists from many perspectives, and as an anthropologist, I am trained to awkwardly glide between all of them before eventually forming my own. In other publications, I've told the story from my perspective of the local Catholic Lonco perspective. In my book, again, I tell the story from my perspective of the Peruvian Mormon perspective. However, for our purposes today, I'm going to allow the church's top temple construction department employees, all four of whom were Utah Anglo Mormons like myself, to tell the story from their perspective. I'm going to read the transcript from an interview that I had in March of 2018 with those four representatives of the church on the Arequipa Temple construction site. The site is in the town of Carmen Alto, which is the name of the town within the municipality of Caima that falls within the city of Arequipa, where the temple was built. So there's a lot of different layers of municipality, region, and it gets pretty confusing. And in my interviews with nearby Lonco landowners, I discovered that many of them had the idea back in 2011 to create a co-op, buy land, and build an apartment on it. This is an aerial view of what Carmen Alto and the surrounding agricultural fields looked like back then. This is Carmen Alto outlined in red, and this tiny red square is all that the neighbors wanted to buy for their apartment venture. However, the city of Caima denied them a permit because there were too many layers of red tape. One, a restriction on building anything tall on the skyline, which was designated part of the bucolic intangible patrimony of Peru as a nation state. Two, a restriction on covering up arable land with buildings of any size because the area was zoned for agriculture at the municipal level. And three, an archaeological restriction from the Peruvian Ministry of Culture at the federal level on disturbing the 3,000-year-old pre-Inca agricultural terracing. So you can imagine how angry these Lonco landowners were when the church bought that very same land the very next year, 2012, with plans to build a gigantic temple on it and an even more gigantic dormitory where members coming from faraway places could lodge.
So the very same land, the very same. Oh, I see. There it is.
Well, it's much bigger. So this area outlined in blue is the land that the church bought up. It is about 1/3 the size of all the rest of Carmen Alto. So I'm asking, like, how is it possible that the Lonco people couldn't build on a tiny plot of their own land, while some powerful foreign institution could buy up a plot of terraced green space so large that it was 33% of the size of the entire town? So Lonco townsfolk wondered which of their elected officials had capitulated to that foreign power, obviously. The feeling of being betrayed by the mayor of Caima, Oswaldo Muniz Huica, was so great that many people honestly thought that he had converted to Mormonism, because they're like, how else could a self-respecting Lonco Caimeño, member of the Tradition and Future political party, do such a thing? I was told he was Mormon on multiple occasions by both Catholics and Mormons alike. In actuality, he wasn't Mormon, and the church didn't have permission to build anything on the land that it bought. So church leaders were counting on the Lord and his lawyers and his money to open doors for them.
Yeah. So who owned the land then? Who did they purchase it from?
So that's a really good question.
I mean, independent.
I guess from the city of Caima.
Or the city.
So it falls within the city of Caima.
Okay.
And I did not. That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. I just was curious about that.
But
we've heard this before. They will buy the land, without having any permit. In fact, they will do a groundbreaking. I learned this before any permits are in place, anything has happened. They purchase it, stick the shovels in and say, it's coming. And everyone thinks, oh, okay. Yeah, this is incredible that this is happening in Peru too.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question about who they bought the land from. Anyway, this what was I gonna say? If you look at the mayor's building projects so I'm going to show some historic map images. If you look at so he has his own agenda, his own building projects, supposedly, but the dates are too closely aligned with the Mormon Temple project to be a coincidence. So this image shows what Carmen Alto looked like in 2011 before the church bought the land. Notice that the area in blue is cultivated and still part of the preserved archaeological zone. Also notice that there is no highway access to Carmen Alto. This is only there. So there's only this steep, bumpy road that can only be accessed by first going through an extremely congested part of the city. You can't just go around that congestion in a car because of the river Chili. There was no vehicle bridge across the river that was even remotely close to Carmen Alto, and the Lonco people liked it that way. Suddenly, after 2012, when the church buys this land with supposedly no permission to build on it, things start to miraculously change. You see a bridge being built across the Chili and a highway project going directly to the church's property. So both of these construction projects are happening at exactly the same time and are completed in 2014. As we will see in the interview transcript that I'm going to read, the temple construction employees from Utah all claimed that this was a miracle. Apparently, with no lobbying or bribery from the church, the mayor of Caima just happened to rezone the entire agricultural area so that he could finish his pet project, which was to build a bridge across the Chili and a highway that just so happens to go directly to the tiny, deliberately isolated town of Carmen Alto, a town that just wants to be left alone, not given an artery connecting it to the metropolis.
And so this would be a municipal project of the city. This wouldn't be federal in any way, but this would be local leaders voting and deciding to do this and allocating the funds, and in an area where this had never happened before and there was no desire or need for it previously from the people that were there, except for now there's this patch here that the church owns, and all roads lead to the temple. We have heard that before.
Was this funded by the Peruvian people?
Yeah, it was funded by the city, the Caima city, as like a renovation project. So the mayor obviously is on board. He wants it's similar to what happened. So honestly, it's similar to what happened in like the 1880s with the dictator of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz, who wanted to he wanted to whiten his nation, and he knew that Mormons were good colonizers, and so that's why he invited them to come with their polygamous families to the northern Mexico colonies. It's kind of the same thing. So the mayor of Caima sees, hey, these Mormons, they're awesome at developing land, and basically kicking indigenous people off of their land. So let's work together to make, to beautify, right? To
So they buy the
gentrify our
property,
area.
and a bridge and a highway appear right to their property, paid for by the Peruvian people.
Yes, definitely paid for not by the church. And yeah, it's just yeah. So anyway, but however, even though the church's new real estate was miraculously rezoned to allow for non-agricultural enterprises such as the highway, so because of this, like now they don't have that hurdle of it being agriculturally zoned anymore, because in order for them to get the highway through, the mayor already changed the zoning. So that's one step closer. And but nevertheless, they still have some hurdles to overcome. And these hurdles, if you think about it, would be impenetrable walls for most organizations. I mean, you would just give up, right? But hurdle number one is managing to dig into the archaeological site without finding any artifacts. Two, getting rid of the bucolic skyline's intangible patrimony designation, because that's still there, right? Those signs are still valid. And three, dealing with the increasingly politicized residents of Carmen Alta, who were at this point starting to suspect some collusion between their elected officials and the LDS Church. And their suspicion only increased when the church fenced off the land at the terminus of the new highway, causing the townsfolk to realize the true purpose of that highway and causing them to see just how gigantic the church's new land truly was. So in this map transition, you can see the transition of the church's land from green to brown after it was fenced off, and for the first time in millennia, people were no longer allowed to plant on it. So I'm going to fast forward to 2017 when the Lord knocked
the
down
golden shovels. There they are, everybody.
So the Lord knocked down those impenetrable walls, and the groundbreaking began after a 5-year delay. And that was when my family and I moved to Arequipa, Peru in January of 2018 for my anthropological project. It was after the groundbreaking, but the construction, when we got there, the construction was speeding right along. And this is basically what the aerial map looks like today. So, and then you can see that. Without further ado, then, here is the anonymized transcript of my March 2018 interview with the Arequipa, Peru Temple Construction Site Management Team. And this team made it pretty clear that they were representatives of the owner. They called themselves, we're representatives of the owner being Russell M. Nelson himself, right?
So are they, just to be clear, are there people that have come in from Salt Lake or from the United States to oversee and work on the temple, or are they people from Peru?
Yeah, there's a whole other presentation I could give about that.
Oh,
But they are not people from Peru, and there's a lot of effort made to make it so that no local input gets into the temple. And so and so all of the top people on the temple construction site are flown in from Utah. They actually live, I'm pretty sure at the church's dime, live in very nice houses in Arequipa for the duration of the project, which was a long project. And so, anyway, so I'm going to start off with, so here's like what the transcript looks like. I'm just going to read.
Oh, wow.
Read it. And then you can
how did you end up connecting with them? How did you end up even having this conversation? This is just, pulling back the curtain on this whole thing.
Well, good question. I mean, a lot of it is honestly white privilege, because a lot of the members, I went to live in Arequipa as to kind of understand how people were becoming worthy of this temple in their city. And so I just joined. So I grew up Mormon. I grew up in Utah. I joined a ward in Arequipa, and the mission president of the Arequipa mission was kind of buddies with all of these temple construction guys, right? And so he's like, and I told him what my project is about. I'm like, I'm researching how people are making themselves worthy of this temple. And he's like a multimillionaire car dealer from Utah, who a lot of people probably know who he is, but I'm not going to tell you his name. Anyway, he was the mission president in Arequipa, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you got to talk to my friend so and so," and the guy who I'm calling Colin. And so I got in touch with him, and he finally just had me over. He's just like, "Yeah, come on over." We made an appointment, and I got into the temple construction site. And he just told me, the first thing he told me was, don't tell any members of your ward what we're letting you do, because they would be green with envy. I mean, they would love to have this access, right, to their holy site in its early stages. But yet here I am with, I don't have like a very personal stake, because I have a kind of different understanding of Mormon spirituality than my study participants do usually. So, but yet I have all this access, right? And in fact, since I got into the construction site and I became kind of a regular feature on the site, I just basically had my free reign. I could just go whenever I wanted, basically, and just hang out with the workers. I ate lunch with the workers all the time. I watched soccer games with them. And there was, they had me sign in. And that sign-in book, they later told me, was going to be put inside the cornerstone of the temple. So my name is inside the cornerstone of the Arequipa Temple.
That's impressive.
Until the second coming, right? So,
and so the idea of talking to them was a project, an anthropological project you were working on, just to understand what was happening with the temple and the members preparing to be able to attend eventually.
Yeah, and you can see that from the question that I ask. It's a kind of a spiritual question. So I'm saying, so Jason, here on the job site, can you think of a specific experience that let you know that the hand of the Lord is in this work? And Colin answers. So Colin, he's a BYU graduate. He's younger than me. He was in his early 30s during this interview. And he's got this sweet job at the temple construction site. I've had some different experiences. When we were here in Arequipa, just making sure that all the permitting and the stuff was in place, we were meeting with the mayor of Caima. So I went in there with our legal representative, and I just went to kind of make sure everything was going well, the permitting process, to see if there was anything we needed. And the city council really wanted the temple project to be in their city. The mayor was doing everything possible to make sure that the reviews, and it was a very positive experience, but we went in and sat down, and he, the mayor, and our attorney proceeded to talk about two miracles. They're not members of the church. They're religious, but not LDS. So they testified about what made this temple project possible. The first to talk was the church's legal representative. She was involved in the permitting and in the region's project of the bridge, and then the subsequent road La Ronda that comes around, which is kind of a main thoroughfare up to the temple. That happened about 5 years ago that they put that in. The region is the equivalent to a state in the United States. So the region of Arequipa did that project, and she was involved, and she just said that, the permits and everything to do that, had that not happened, the chain of subsequent events that allowed us to rezone this area to build a temple, to purchase the property, to have access to the property, to do all of these things, well, if that bridge and road project had not happened, then this temple project would not have happened here, which is quite an amazing sight. And she was just telling, I don't remember all the details, but just she saw, because then she was involved from our side with the rezoning and all of the permitting. She's just like, oh, wow, looking back, look at all these steps that were just perfectly timed and put into place for this to happen legally. And then the mayor was talking about kind of early on, when everyone knew the temple was going to happen here, and they were reviewing for the permit, one of the local congregations in this area's Catholic parishes, the priest went around and got all of these signatures to petition not to have the temple. That petition was given to the mayor of Caima, and the priest told him, look at this letter, look at this petition. This is a Catholic area. You shouldn't approve the Mormon temple building permit. It's your duty as a Catholic and all this. It is your duty to our heritage, which has a history of unique. You need to stop this, and it shouldn't be here, and all this. And the mayor was surprised because he's friends with the Archbishop of Arequipa here. Side note, the Archbishop of Arequipa regularly speaks at BYU and at religious freedom conferences all over the world. And he's a very strong advocate for religious freedom and a very good friend of the church. And then he laughs. The mayor is friends with the Archbishop, and so he gives the Archbishop this petition. And in a later discussion with the Archbishop, he was having lunch, but the Archbishop told him, "No, I'm going to tell the priest to rescind this petition." The Archbishop of Arequipa immediately called the priest of Carmen Alto into his office and basically said, "Our whole thing is religious freedom, and especially the LDS with everything that's occurred in the United States and all over the world." And they just had that big religious freedom conference and the conference on families in Europe, and it was all of this stuff. And he just told the priest like this, "Absolutely not. If you ever do something like this petition again, you're out." And so I said,
Wow.
wow, that's what I said.
I said, wow,
But
the same thing it says on Jason's transcript right there. What do you think about that, Landon? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's amazing because we've seen this exact set of miracles happen
Yeah.
just about everywhere. Heber
Yeah.
Valley, after 20 years of dark sky initiative, they changed their dark sky policy amazingly just in time to allow the church to light that temple. And then they say, oh no, it had nothing to do with the temple. We were
Miracle.
doing that. We see an LDA get put in place so that the church doesn't have to go through all the zoning laws. We see similar things in Cody, where both Cody and Las Vegas, we see zoning codes get rewritten right before the church starts to build on that land.
Right. And long before residents know anything about it.
Yes.
Why would you follow what your city council is doing so closely? But it's a miracle. It was all rezoned.
Yeah.
So, you look at this and you say, how much of this is the Lord's hand and how much of this is putting something in somebody else's hand to make this change.
Yeah.
Good way to say it.
I did want to ask, I think it was on the page before, but you said that they built the road and all that so the land could be purchased, but it sounded to me like they had purchased the land prior to the road going in. Is that correct?
I think, they purchased the land prior to the road going in.
Okay.
But then they couldn't do anything with it. Like it was just, they were just kind of counting on,
so they bought this road with pure faith that someone was going to build a road there, not knowing beforehand what they should do. And they just went and bought the land and hoped someone would build a road up to it. And miraculously, a highway got built right up to their land.
Yep. That's the way he portrays it. And I honestly think Colin believed that. Like, so he wasn't in on any of the things that must have gone behind the scenes, right? Before they bought the land, they obviously must have made some sort of arrangement with the mayor.
Well, and is it a coincidence that the lawyer is the same lawyer for the church, is the same lawyer that is the lawyer for the highway project and the permitting of the highway project? Is that just coincidence? And we asked that same question in some of the other localities in the United States where, oh, wow, the attorney that's representing the church just happens to be the one who, made a
donates money
to the political city council. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, all the codes change and everything falls into place just in time for the vote for the temple.
But I'm guessing that this narrative is shared in a faith promoting way, and that most of the members now believe it as faith promoting. It was probably mentioned at conference, or who knows, it was probably in church magazines about the miracle of the Peruvian temple. So I think it does take on a life of its own. Nobody cares to look into it. And it just sounds like another amazing feel-good story around a temple, which that's part of building a temple, all those quote miracles that happen.
Yeah. And also the sort of, we might call it like the collusion between the Catholic Church and the LDS Church. But, the faith promoting story is that's ecumenical, right? Like they're getting together, they're putting aside their differences. But really that's a big euphemism is religious freedom, right? Because I actually went to a religious freedom conference I think it was at the University of Utah as part of my project. And they didn't even, it was called the Religious Freedom Conference, but every single roundtable or presentation, I think Governor Herbert was there. Everything was centered on, it was basically homophobia and transphobia. Like that's all it was. It was the freedom to persecute the LGBTQ community. That's what they meant by freedom of religion at that conference. And they weren't even trying to hide it. And so because I kept asking people, like, why do you guys call this freedom of religion? Like, what, freedom to do what?
Yeah.
No,
we say that all the time, and we do podcast about that, but you're absolutely right. And in this case, you have a archbishop who is good friends with, the LDS church, and his priest who's saying, no, I live there, I'm local, we don't want this. And he's basically threatened, you're going to let this happen. So that's
one thing this really shines a light on to me is, Mormon God can't solve the LGBTQ issues for the church. Mormon God can't solve world hunger, or even tell his prophets to donate their hundreds of billions of dollars towards solving that. They can't stop the child abuse in their own wards and stakes. God doesn't seem to care about that. But my gosh, he can zone the hell out of anything, anywhere in the world. Mormon God is a real estate God. That is what he is. And you see it everywhere. And I guess, to be fair, the God of the Old Testament, it's always about them getting the land and taking the land and owning the land.
You're not wrong.
So God is really all about real estate. I'm not sure how much he really cares about the people of the world. He seems to care more about the land and the real estate deals than anything else, because he can change that like this.
Wow.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. There's a lot of parallels that could be made between, Zion. That's why it's called Zion, right? It's the same idea. It's Zionism, really.
Wow.
And there's a lot of parallels. But I think you haven't seen anything yet, because there's still the third miracle to come here.
Well, let's remind everybody, the first miracle is
the first
bridge.
The first miracle was the bridge, and which resulted in a rezoning, right?
Yes.
The second miracle is the Catholic resistance being squashed.
Perfect.
And then, the third miracle is coming up. So, but this is what Colin says about it. So I say, wow. He says, and so the mayor is telling us this story that I hadn't really heard. I had kind of heard some things, but to hear it in detail from a different perspective, it was like, wow, what could have been our biggest opposition was at the highest level of the Catholic Church in this area, just absolutely squashed. And then Sawyer, who's another member of the site management team, he says that the Lord had prepared the way. And then Colin says, it was amazing, because the Archbishop, and we met him, he came to the groundbreaking as a VIP, and we've invited him more. The public relations people in Lima for the Church's South America area offices regularly meet with him about humanitarian projects and religious issues. It's just all of that had already been set up, so that when these issues came up, and then there was another one. I laugh, and Colin says, so to get the construction permit, we needed to have a special certificate from Peru's National Ministry of Culture, which handles ruins and antiquities and stuff. And we needed a special certificate, which they had already indicated multiple times that they would not give us. So even though everything was rezoned and we were good to go with the city, we couldn't get our building permit. We were kind of stuck, which explains the 5-year delay between the temple announcement and the groundbreaking. And the city was, well, what do we do with this? How do we... And the mayor and the city government kept pressuring the Peruvian Ministry of Culture at the federal level, and we kept asking the Ministry of Culture, and there was either, no, we're not going to give that to you, or just no response at all. But then they wouldn't give us any recourse. So we were kind of stuck. And kind of midway through this process and review by the city, the Ministry of Viviendas y Construcción, which is really like economic development for the entire country, to which the Ministry of Culture is subservient, they created a new law affecting all of Peru that permitting no longer required any input from the Ministry of Culture. So right when we thought we were stuck and we didn't know what to do, the laws of the entire country changed.
Wow. I don't even know what to say about that. We say all the time, please follow the laws of the land. But as we've seen in every city where a temple is being built, those laws are usually changed so they can be followed. I can't believe that this might be the case in a country, not just a state or a county or a city.
Well,
Yeah.
I believe it because relupia is a federal law in the United States,
Yeah.
which was changed effectively by the Mormon Church when they couldn't put a steeple on the Boston, Massachusetts
Yes.
temple. And so Utah and LDS senators introduced a bill for relupia, which allowed them to bypass or at least to have a lot of privilege in building in areas where they weren't allowed to build. So if they could do it here in the United States, a third world country like Peru, and I haven't been to Peru, maybe it's second world, I'm not sure, but to for a church that has more money than probably the entire country of Peru has, that would not be surprising that they would be able to get laws changed.
Yeah.
They just went over their head, basically. The one ministry wouldn't do what they needed, so they went over their head. It looks like, it appears like, but then again, is it just a miracle? I mean,
well, as an anthropologist, I really do try to almost metaphysically like shapeshift into my interlocutor's reality and see things from their point of view as genuinely as I can. And so kind of because of that, actually, I took this so-called miracle pretty much at face value as either an honest to goodness miracle or a pretty amazing coincidence. And then I kind of forgot about it because of that. And I didn't really dig into it until I heard your episode about the underhanded tactics that the church used to get the laws changed in Las Vegas for the Lone Mountain Temple.
right.
And then I went back and dug up these transcripts and was like, wait a minute, if the church is talking to the Archbishop of Arequipa, what is stopping them from talking to the Archbishop of Lima, who basically runs the country, and to the president of Peru himself, who was none other than Pedro Pablo Kuczynski at the time, they call him PPK, who was actually a U.S. citizen who had to renounce his citizenship to become president of Peru, and whom soon after this interview with Colin was impeached and jailed for corruption. So there's that.
Yeah, so I guess we should say, like we always say on any of our podcasts, we don't know what this means. We're just pointing out these things and saying, is it a coincidence? Is it a miracle? Did something happen? We don't know and we can't say. All we can do is read a transcript and talk about actual events. We'll leave it up to our viewers and listeners to put things together in whatever way they want, because we do not know.
Yeah. And but it is a good thing for a future researcher out there if you want to, because it is knowable. It's probably knowable.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Colin goes on to say, the laws of the entire country changed in our favor. And as soon as that new law came into effect, the city was on it. And as soon as that law came out, they stamped our plans, they sent us the permit, and we started. We later, in conjunction to this, just so everyone knows, because it was in the newspapers that we were trying to do something bad, but so we met with the Ministry of Culture, even though we no longer had to, and in an effort to help them feel that we were protecting their history, culture, and antiquities, we asked them, what would you like to feel comfortable during the excavation and stuff that we could? And they said, well, we would like you to monitor excavation with this archaeological plan. It's a process with them. It's a little permit and a fee. And so we happily did that. We did it with the Trujillo Temple too. And it just required us to document and to make sure that we weren't covering up any artifacts that we found or anything. And we didn't find anything. And then he goes on to talk about the whole thing with the Trujillo Peru Temple, which was dedicated in 2015 and that Colin also worked on. And that one was built in an even more ridiculously offensive location, right next to the UNESCO endangered site of Chan Chan, the largest adobe city in the world.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Wow. UNESCO is United Nations World Heritage Site, basically.
Yeah, something like that.
World Heritage. This is
wow, that's gorgeous.
UNESCO. Yeah.
That's incredible.
And it's actually in UNESCO's endangered category, and that means it's an extremely fragile site. And yet here comes the church weaseling its way into somehow building a temple inside the buffer zone meant to protect Chan Chan from development. And the Arequipa Temple site management team was proud of that. They actually, I didn't ask any more questions. They just went off and told me all the things that they're proud of. One of them was being able to build a temple inside the place meant to protect this fragile site.
And
they
why? Why would it need to be built in that location?
Well, this location is, a lot of people believe, because of I guess I haven't read the Book of Mormon in a long time, but when Moronites talk, so I mean, most Peruvian Mormons believe in a model of the Book of Mormon that a lot of people don't hear about up here in the North America, which is the Peruvian model of Book of Mormon archaeology.
Okay.
Which actually, I think Spencer Kimball said that Lehi landed in Peru. But so this Chan Chan is often thought to be Zarahemla by Peruvians.
So are you saying that the church, entertaining that idea, wanted to put their temple in a place that is believed there to be Zarahemla?
Yeah, I would not. I don't know.
Oh, and we thought, Landon, that it was
Another
bad enough. All these
coincidence.
other temples that we see going into residential neighborhoods where they have no business being and they're disrespectful. The idea that a temple would be put in a protected world-class site where it could actually damage or cause, some harm to the site. I'm almost floored by that.
So it's what is being said here is, in both cases, they weren't just given permits to build from a city council. They were given permits to build in archaeologically protected areas to build their temple. And amazingly, they found no artifacts, just like farms and every other group that's gone to try to find Book of Mormon artifacts.
That's true. They would hope to find some, I would think, since this is
think they
Mormon
would
land.
want more than anything to find artifacts. It wouldn't be a miracle if they didn't find it. It would be a miracle if they found a Book of Mormon artifact, but they didn't.
I guess we should make that point, that by protecting it, the Ministry of Culture, that is what we're talking about: digging things up, harming artifacts that you might find, not respecting them in the right way. And that's why it was protected. And then I'm going back to that line. We found nothing in an area that's protected, I believe, because they know there are artifacts there. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't protect it. I mean, the other ones have been found. So that's very interesting too.
Yeah. And it's, well, if you're interested, so I'm almost done with this little part. And then, but yeah, it sounds like, he definitely goes on to explain the differences between the Trujillo and Arequipa temples as far as permitting and stuff. But I did something funny with this. So I said, and the Arequipa temple site management team, well, they were proud of it, and they thought they were doing Peru a favor, actually, by doing this, because as Colin told me in one of our mini conversations, it's not like we're building right on top of Chan Chan. We're building adjacent to it. And with that logic, I wouldn't be surprised if visitors to Machu Picchu are one day greeted by this AI-generated scene and expected to feel grateful when the prophet tells them, well, it's not like we built on top of Machu Picchu. We just built right next to it.
It's right next to it. And that just goes to the word that I learned in our last podcast, where one of the residents said at one of the city meetings, this is disrespectful to put, buildings in neighborhoods that don't fit, that, run roughshod over city councils and planning commissions to get it put through. This AI is a perfect example, beyond disrespectful. I mean, not that this will happen, but things like this are happening all the time.
Well,
and it just has no respect for the existing culture or city plan or anything.
And they already announced a temple in Cusco. There's one being built in Cusco. So there's any anthropologists of Mormonism out there, there's your next project.
Wow. And what year was it the second temple that we're talking about in Peru built?
I believe it was dedicated in 2015.
Okay, so this is about the same time they're building both of them. So the same city government, the same country government they would be dealing with for both. Okay.
And Colin goes on to explain.
Trujillo, Trujillo, were they able to build there because they changed the laws, or were they building there before they changed the laws?
Well, that's exactly the question that I asked Colin. So, do you want me to just keep reading?
No, this is, I think now that I think our viewers understand what's happening here, let's keep going with some of the more relevant things, because it's a pattern.
Yeah, because I was like, the next slide was like a choose your own adventure, and it looks like you guys are choosing
I
for
think
me
we're
to just
choosing more
continue.
temple stuff. Yeah, we
You're choosing
are.
number
So,
7. Colin's transcript
and I will say to
continues.
our viewers and listeners, we had already planned with Jason that we're going to have him on a couple times to talk about because there's so much good stuff here. But tonight we were going to focus on temples and just see how long it takes us. And
Yeah.
so if we're focusing on that, I think that's really of
Let's keep
interest
going.
because now we understand. Now we're in the zone. So let's do it.
So adventure number 7, Colin's transcript continues, including a Moroni miracle.
Here
I
we
don't know
go.
if we'll get to the Moroni miracle, but anyway, I'll just go back to this. I don't have any other slides, so do I? Yeah, this was his office. This is where the interview was taking place. So
Okay.
we'll just keep it on there. But anyway, Jason, oh really? Colin, yeah, the oldest thing that we could verify that we found were pottery shards from the 40s. So I guess I asked him before this. I asked him like if he like. So I was like, you really didn't find anything in
Right.
the Trujillo Temple? And no, that's the Arequipa Temple. He's saying, yeah, the oldest thing that we could verify that we found were pottery shards from the 40s. So, but like, it's important to know that. So I'm an archaeologist, actually. Like that's how I got into anthropology. Right now, this is what's called sociocultural anthropology. But I started in Weber State University. I got a degree in archaeology there, and so I know that like if you don't want to find anything, it's pretty easy to not find anything. It's very
I
difficult to
see.
find something. So
Huh.
it's so and for him to say like that they could verify, like so there's pottery shards, right? But they're from the 40s, so who cares? And they're not gonna like dig any deeper than that. They're not trying to find anything, and they're doing. I mean, I can just imagine like how it's like, oh, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you
Yeah.
find something, guys, just
Nothing to see
don't tell
here.
us about it. um, so I asked Jason, well, what about in Trujillo? Did you find anything there? Colin, no, which was even more amazing because the Trujillo temple lies within an archaeological buffer zone of Chan Chan. Jason, oh wow. Sawyer, that's right. It's right on the side. It's right on the site. Colin, yeah, Chan Chan is the largest adobe city in the world. And so it's a protected area, but it has this buffer zone around it. So the laws for construction or anything are quite strict in that buffer zone because you're so close. It's highly likely that you're going to find something. And so they wanted to have better control. And same thing, we got the permit. We actually had the certificates and everything and then we did the monitoring plan during excavation, and we didn't find anything, which was a miracle in and of itself. Jason. So, but the Ministry of Culture, back when it had to okay the permit for the Trujillo Temple, the ministry was okay with that? Colin, yeah. The biggest thing here in Arequipa is that they didn't want to give us any documentation. There's a man. I don't know if he's still there, but there was someone in the Ministry of Culture here in Arequipa who was very adamant that nothing happened in this area of Carmen Alto. As
Hmm.
you've seen, the terraces and those are quite old, and from his perspective, nothing should ever be done, and it should be green farmland terraces forever. And so I have a little sidebar here where I say, Colin says this with a certain disdain in his voice, as if there is something wrong with conserving cultural patrimony forever. And then
Although
Sawyer says,
the church is well known for trying to preserve their history and be able to tell
Exactly.
their narrative,
Right.
but
But
they
no one
don't
else
want
is.
anyone else to have that.
No one else is. Oh my goodness.
and then Sawyer says, most of the other areas are protected now. And Colin says, yeah, both of these kind of river valleys, Jason, yeah, Colin, are protected, clears throat, and they have been for a while. But he was trying to make that even more strict and bigger, and he was trying to enlarge those protected zones. We didn't, and we don't have any Inca terraces on our property. We're adjacent to those protected areas, but he was very adamant that no, this should be protected too, because it was farmland before. Jason, yeah. Colin, so that's why there was a non-response as far as this project. Jason, oh, okay. Colin, but in Trujillo, we had the certificate. You can get 2 certificates. One that says we don't think there's anything there, so go ahead and dig, or we think there's something there, so you need to monitor. Jason, oh, okay. Colin, so in Trujillo, we got the certificate that said we think there's something there, you need to monitor, which is an automatic when you're in the buffer zone. Jason, yeah. Colin, and so We monitored it and nothing there. I mean, the archaeologists are there, they're screening, they're dating, and there was nothing there. So the one comment that the archaeologist made that was interesting is, as we were walking around and looking through some of the excavation piles, she went and she picked up this piece of clay or brick. And she goes, because I was asking her, have you found anything? Anything that gives you concerns? And she said no. And she picked this up and she goes, see this little piece? She said, this could be from the Moche or Chimu culture 2,000 years ago and part of their pottery, she said, or it could be from last week. Jason laughs. Colin, because we are using the same dirt, the same clay, and the same methods that we did 2,000 years ago. And she says, there's absolutely no way to tell. And then I give a little sidebar here because I'm an archaeologist too. And yes, there is a way to date pottery that's out of context. The thing is, that way is expensive, right? And they don't want to find that it's old. So they're not going to, they're not going to pay for it. Because obviously the Ministry of Culture in Trujillo, for some reason, wanted this temple to happen. Whereas the Ministry of Culture in Arequipa, the local office, they were dead set against it. And I actually visited them after the temple was already built. And they almost didn't let me talk to them because I'm from Utah. And they were like against me even being there. But once I convinced them that I just wanted to tell their side of the story, they let me in. But the main archaeologist
before you go there, Jason, do you have a picture of the Trujillo temple?
I didn't have it in one of my slides.
I wonder if you could search one, Landon, while we're talking, and then maybe you could share your screen, because now that we're mentioning it, I'd love to be able to see it if we could. So I think it's really interesting. I think it says that the church definitely has completely thrown away the Peruvian model of the Book of Mormon, because otherwise it would be a little more concerned about the sites or what they might possibly find. I think they're definitely throwing it out the window, that it was not in Peru. We don't need to worry about any of those artifacts.
There's a chapter in my book that's about that, about a lot of Peruvians are trying to get the church to recognize Peru as a Book of Mormon site. And it's not happening.
The church doesn't recognize any site as a Book of Mormon site, as we've written a letter saying it's somewhere in the Americas. That's all we'll say. So in one sense, they do.
Even though they've already, it's kind of, but anyway, my book talks a lot about that idea of like almost the church throwing people under the bus for adopting the very identity that the church told them, originally, right?
Well, if we don't have a picture yet of the other temple, maybe can we scroll back, since you said we went through your slides, to one of the pictures of the temple that we're talking about. Let's rest on that. It's so
you mean
pretty.
The Arequipa Temple?
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now he's talking about the
other one.
I mean, let's see. I could
It's like Jason's travel log. We want more, right?
Let me go to the dedication pictures then, because there's a more beautiful. Let's see if I have a better one.
That would be great.
It's on my book cover.
Oh, look, Landon pulled. There it is. Okay.
There we go.
And you know what? Maybe we'll insert one when we put this video out so we can see it. But yeah, that's very pretty.
Well, I'll just go back to this. This one. Yeah, that's the.
There it is.
That's the classic. But yeah, my book cover has the temple on it, and I'm kind of glad. Like, authors don't get to design their own book covers when you're writing for an academic press. And so, but I was happy that they went with that, because I think my study participants, who are mostly believing Peruvian Mormons, will be happy with that book cover.
That's great. All right. I didn't mean to distract you by making you go back through your slides. Continue your Moroni story.
We'll stay on that slide.
7.
Well, so let's see. Colin using the same dirt. Yeah. So I kind of like, he's saying that there was no possible way to date that pottery, which maybe at the time there wasn't, but actually now it is dateable. It's just expensive. Colin, and she threw it back in the ground, talking about the potsherd that she found. Had they found multiple pieces, then obviously, or Sawyer, or a graveyard like they did, Colin, or a graveyard like we found during the Concepcion Chile temple, an unmarked graveyard and but all the countries. So he kind of just like stutters there and then stops talking about that.
Oh dear.
He moved a graveyard to build the temple?
I don't know. I did not go back and ask about that because I got sidetracked. But yeah, it sounds like
more research, right? Take a note.
Something
Wow.
happened with the graveyard in the Concepcion, Chile temple.
Wow.
So look that up.
You
My
had to dig up the
goodness.
dead to save them, I guess.
Yep. Dig them up, save them. Yep. You got it.
Yeah.
Church has been doing that ever since Alvin. So
Well,
that's.
You had to go there.
So Chile, Peru, they all have ways to not inhibit economic development but still protect cultural heritage. So if you've seen, and even here in Arequipa, but also in Cusco, that sometimes we'll build above an archaeological site and you'll have a glass floor to show that none of those ancient walls or aqueducts were disturbed.
Oh,
And you get
really?
special permission and you just, so they recognize these are hard countries. Central America, Italy, Peru are very difficult because people have been living here for 5,000 or 6,000 years. And then I give a sidebar here because so I'm in critical indigenous studies, right? So he says this as if people haven't been living in North America for at least 30,000 years,
Right.
right? So um he's not considering the Native Americans of North America to be, really to matter. Colin, you almost can't go anywhere and not find something. And they recognize that. They recognize that they have two options. They can say no to anything, and people are going to do it anyways, and coughs, destroy artifacts. Or they can say, yes, we are going to work with you and protect as many of the important things as we can. And that's what we do in the church temple construction department. The churches and temples are always first and foremost legally compliant. And that's what we tell people. If we had been trying to do anything sneaky or underhanded, we would have started this project 4 years ago. We announced it in 2012. Jason, yeah, Colin, why did we wait until 2017 to start? Well, because that's how long it takes to follow the law here. And then I put a little snarky sidebar there. I say, interpretation, that's how long it takes to railroad the legality through by any means necessary here in Peru. And so
That's
Jason,
how long it takes to change the law here, I think is
Yeah.
maybe what we're alluding to. Oh, my
And I
goodness.
like how they always go to legal because they
Yeah.
have the power to change the law to make it legal and just railroad the indigenous
Yeah.
people, the local inhabitants, the local people, and they run them over and then they say, oh, well, it's legal. But the question for a church shouldn't be, is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it morally correct?
Yeah.
That's the question that should be being asked. Is it morally correct to get roads built to your land so that you can build something that the locals couldn't get through because they don't have billions of dollars to push that through?
Yeah. I actually talked to a woman who lives right next to where the temple is now. It was before it was built, and she was seeing it being constructed right in front of her, and she just broke down and cried. And when I asked her, like, would you stop it if you could? And she said, yes, I would, of course I would stop it if I could, but I can't. Like, they have money. She assumed that the president of Peru was in on it. Like, she just was, I mean, unbelievable. Like, imagine like you bought this nice property with this nice view, and then all of a sudden this gigantic building comes and blocks it because it's blocking the people's, you know, because it's like on a hill overlooking all of Arequipa. So
No, and we see that perspective with all the different residents in the towns that we talk to, Heber and Cody and Lone Mountain and Fairview. And that's exactly it. They just can't believe it. They're just floored and they're so disheartened, that they bought in a zone where, everything's protected. They followed the rules and now suddenly everything changes. And nobody can understand how huge it is until they see it right there. No one can know. We visited the Landon, Utah temple, which is under construction right now. And of course, you can read on paper, oh, it's this big and this big. But when you drive up to that and you see large houses, like 3-story large affluent houses about this big, and the temple is that big, you really look, I even have spires like that. You really can't fathom it until you see it. And then I think it's just so overwhelming for these residents, and they understand what they're up against. They understand there's probably no hope because in most cases, their cities have caved to this. And yes, the church is doing everything legally, but the manipulation behind the scenes. So yeah, I understand that woman crying. I think when these other temples start being built with the residents that we're dealing with, people have said they're going to move, or people will cry. They're just disillusioned by the entire process and disillusioned by the divisiveness it's caused in communities. And it's just a lose-lose all around. And again, you could build these buildings. these temples, I'm even saying some of the temples are attractive. I'm not saying temples are not unattractive, but build them in an appropriate place, and then everyone can enjoy them, and they really can be that blessing that they keep using that word, and you're not going to have anybody crying. So anyway, there's my soapbox. Every day I'm on a temple soapbox, but I didn't know about this, and this just, it makes me really sad too.
And I would say, you know, you look at this temple and I see, okay, they've made it look like a 500-year-old Spanish monastery or something. So it fits in with their culture. But again, this culture isn't the Spanish culture. This is the Incan culture that they're building on. Or I don't know, is it Incan or?
Well, it's actually, that's what Colin said, but it was used all up through the Inca. It's pre-Inca, but the Incas used them as well. And then, it's been used continuously for 3,000 years.
So again, you're building a structure that looks like European colonialism of the Peruvian land, blocking their sacred mountain or their sacred god, built on an area that had been farmed for thousands and thousands of years by indigenous peoples. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, of course, it's even more complicated than that. And the church, they didn't end up building that dormitory I mentioned because they wanted to. It's another one of those things where they're kind of buying people's gratefulness, like, oh well, at least we didn't do what we planned to do, you know. So they kept most of their land is green, and they didn't build the dormitory because there was still a restriction on, like, you can't, on the land that you buy, a certain percent needs to be maintained as green, and so that's why they just planted grass. That was part of that law
that changed, right? They changed the law and said you can build on this land, but you have to keep a certain percentage green.
Yeah. And so they didn't end up being able to do the dormitory, which actually ended up being really interesting because then a lot of entrepreneurial members of the church bought like different hostels and like little hotels around in Carmen Alto, where previously there had been no Mormons living there. A bunch of Mormons moved there to be able to rent rooms to the people who are visiting temples. And so that's a whole interesting little side note that I discovered when I went to the dedication. What was that?
A little cottage industry around the temple.
And that was
literally
that kind of
selling cottages.
A cottage industry selling cottages. There you go. Perfect.
And so and then I asked Colin a question going back to the Book of Mormon. I say, not only that, but the ruins that might have been discovered, quite possibly, could have been from the Book of Mormon, right? The Book of Mormon people. So the church has that extra sort of, Colin, Jason, reason here in Latin America. Colin, we have an added self-interest in preserving, and the PR guy for the church area office is wonderful. Some of his comments that were made, just because he talks about this, like a significant part of our doctrine revolves around family history and preserving and recognizing. So we would never do anything to jeopardize that. And then in my sidebar, I say, oh, so you're saying you would never build a temple right on top of someone's intangible patrimony? You would never build a temple right next to a major World Heritage site, especially not one that's on UNESCO's list of sites in danger like Chan Chan? I mean, of course not, right? Of course, I didn't ask that question. Instead, I said, I was trying to get, I just asked about who the PR guy is. Is he from Arequipa? Colin, no, he's actually Bolivian, but he's in Lima. And then I go on to talk about, let's see, South America, Northwest area. So I ask, so just to clarify that, so the church bought this land before knowing that it was going to be possible to zone it for a temple. So when they bought it, it was, Colin, Jason, it was not zoned for this kind of construction, or was it? Colin, no. And to be honest, most of our temple sites are not zoned for temples when we buy them. Jason, so then you have to work hard to get it rezoned to a different kind of thing? Colin, yeah, depending on the country, it differs on its level of difficulty. The United States, it's fairly easy to rezone because the temples are usually in residential areas and churches or schools are usually, you have to change the zoning. But it's usually accepted within that residential zoning area or neighborhood that you need churches, you need schools, you need these types of, but here, the mayor of Kaima had this master plan. So we knew what his master plan was, and we found a way to fit the temple into it. Jason, oh, okay. So the zoning was already going to change. Colin, going being a loose term. Jason, okay, laughs. Are they, Colin, 20, 30, 40? Jason, oh, Colin, 50 years? We didn't know. Jason, oh, so someone wanted, Colin, but we knew because this land is available. And then I put a sidebar and so that thing, that when he says this land is available, that is a colonizer mindset. My colonizer mindset alert goes off of what's called terra nullius, or the doctrine of discovery. Colin just cannot see developable land without wanting to get his hands on it. And that's just the colonizer mindset, right? And that's why the Mormons were invited into northern Mexico by Porfirio Diaz, and why the mayor, who also has that mindset, wants the Mormons helping him out with his master plan. So Colin says, we knew that Carmen Alto and these areas, as they go up the foothills of Chachani, are going to be developed eventually. Whether we have a hand in it or not, it was still going to happen. There's a lot of squatting, and actually squatters' rights in Peru still, and the city knows that so-called green spaces get invaded from highland migrants who set up squatter communities. So once again, they had the option to accept the fact that development is going to happen and to say yes, so that they can try to control it, or to say no, and it's going to happen anyway, but it's not going to be organized. Well, if anything, the church is good at organized development. So the mayor of Caima knew that he needed us, and we knew that we needed him. And then in my sidebar, I say, keep in mind that squatters' rights in Peru are a form of reparations to indigenous people for the ongoing genocide they resist on a daily basis, and that the highland migrants of which Colin speaks are usually Quechua and Aymara-speaking indigenous people from Puno, Peru. So the reason why the mayor of Caima is teaming up with the Mormons, and this is where I say what I just said, is basically the same reason why the Mexican fascist dictator Porfirio Diaz agreed to let Mormon polygamists set up colonies in northern Mexico in the late 1800s. He knew that Anglo-Mormons were good at colonizing, at eliminating the indigenous people of the land, and at taming the desert. And he wanted that orderly colonizing influence in his country. In other words, he wanted to whiten his country, just like the mayor of Caima wanted to whiten Carmen Alto, quite literally, because the temple is white.
Bright white.
Yeah.
Are these temples that are built in like Peru, are they lit to the same level, speaking of light, that,
Yeah.
I mean, because if that's the case, there are much, I mean, temples like here in this area, there's a whole bunch of city lights. And I mean, although they're blinding, there still are city lights. This seems like they would very low light levels. So how are these lit to Jesus, like the ones that you see elsewhere?
Yeah, it's like, it is like the most, I mean, the biggest thing on the skyline at night. They don't light it up all night, but it is lit when it's dark, and it like characterizes the skyline basically.
Yeah, I know. That's intangible. I love that word. Oh, here we go. Landon looked it up.
Yeah.
That's it at night. So
we're on a shoestring budget here. We just look at pictures on our phone and hold them up. We don't.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it,
so
yeah,
it is
and I
lit
mean,
the same as any, the
Yeah.
American Fork Temple or any other temple. It looks like it's lit to the hills.
Yeah.
So you can
No,
see
and I learned a new word, the intangible word. I mean, I knew that word, but in this context, that's what I keep trying to describe. You don't understand. It's not that it's there, it's what it does to everything that's intangible around. And I remember when we were in St. George area, and I had forgotten that the Red Cliffs Temple was even a thing. It was not on my radar at all. And we were driving down a street, and suddenly there it was. And it's the color of the red cliffs around, but you can't see anything but that. We were enjoying the natural beauty, the red cliffs, and then we're like, oh my goodness. And it's absolutely set there so you can see it from anywhere. And even if you think, okay, I'm going to look over here, you can't. It's there. The intangible quality of the area, the restful quality of just letting your eye look across a beautiful natural landscape. It's like a record skip. What's that? You can't recover from that. Once they do that to your area, there it is. It's never going to go away.
And they specifically say that in some of
Mhm.
the city council, that the architecture is designed to draw your eye to it.
Yeah.
They're intentionally trying to draw your eye. So they're trying to draw your eye away from everything else, including the natural beauty around it. And one thing I found when you said, I think it was Colin who said, well, the land is empty now, so it's available. Well,
Yeah.
it's only available because they've protected it. They
Yeah.
intentionally
Good
made it. They
point.
designed it.
Good
They
point.
developed it that way, if you want to use that word. And you came in and squashed their development, what the locals wanted to do with it. You squashed it and did what you wanted to do with it.
Yeah. And there's no way, like he's saying that squatter communities were going to spring up there. That wouldn't be able to happen because like they don't have the financial capacity to get laws changed. That you can't just, yeah. So that's kind of disingenuous of him to mention that, oh, if we didn't do it, if we don't get to it first, someone's going to do it. No, I mean it's been like this for 3,000 years. It's not if they've kept it like this for that long, there's no reason to think it was going to change.
Well, and it's hard to imagine that any other entity would have the influence to make all these changes. I mean, have you thought through that? Like, could it be someone somewhere else with some kind of I just don't see that there's any other entity that could have accomplished all of this so quickly behind the scenes. And ironically, at the same time, like you said, the miracles, the things that were needed. I mean, these are big changes. It takes big influence to be able to enact this kind of a thing.
Yeah, or like really what entity would have wanted to, right?
That's the other question. What would be the motivation of any entity? You haven't seen any other development or anything else happen. It's all that. It's all for the temple.
And the fact that he said, oh, yeah, this will change in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The church did not buy that lot thinking, oh, maybe in 50 years we'll be able to build on it. They knew they were going to be able to build on it. They knew they had the influence. And the fact that he said, we buy a lot of our properties are built where they're not zoned for it. That's the problem that they're having. Yeah. That's why the neighbors are all mad. And they say, oh, well, there's schools and churches. Nobody cares if a school or a church is built in a residential community. They expect those, just like he said. These are not churches.
Nope.
Churches do not
5 times bigger than a house.
5 times taller than everything else.
Right.
In McKinney, there is a church. There's an LDS church right next to where they're building it. Nobody had a problem with the church.
Compared to the temple.
Yeah, no one had a problem because why? Its height was in the zoning. It was 30-foot height. It fit into the neighborhood. The problem isn't, do you want churches in the neighborhood? It's, do you want 200-foot tall churches in the neighborhood? And that's what they're arguing against. They're not arguing against churches. They're arguing against 200-foot churches. If the church meets the zoning laws, nobody has a problem. Why doesn't the church just buy in an area that's already zoned for it, rather than have these fights and have to do this influence and have to pull these punches and have to run over indigenous and locals to get what they want? That does not seem Christ-like. That does not seem like the church that I grew up in. But now that I know Mormon God is a real estate God, I guess maybe that's why I'm not there anymore.
That's right. Well, that one statement that you read by Colin, that was so telling when he said, oh, this is what we do. It just was a matter of fact. It just makes you think, if you look back through almost any land purchase, it's going to be residential. They're going to have to change the codes. I mean, we don't even know the scope of this.
Yeah.
Pre-internet, we have no idea what they did to do this. So, wow.
Yeah. And we have to remember, and I also have to remember that, I mean, for example, like when Colin listens to this episode, he's gonna feel betrayed, right? Because I didn't let him know that I was critical of the church.
Right.
And he actually, I mean, he considered himself to be critical of the church in a lot of ways. But we have to remember that, and he has to remember that it's kind of my job to shift in and out of this, right. To be in the zone of seeing it as a miracle the way he sees it, and then to come out and criticize it because it's harming other people, right? And so it's a really weird situation for me as an anthropologist, because there's no way I'm going to offend somebody no matter what I do, right? I'm trying be generous to him, of what his words, trying to take what he says in the best possible light. Um, and but at the same time, I'm highly critical of it. And but he does get back to the sort of spiritual nature, because he kind of tacks back and forth between the real estate aspect of it, which is really where the bulk of his focus is, and the spiritual aspect. And I'm actually, in my questions, I'm trying to get him back to the spiritual aspect. So the next thing he says is, so Colin, I don't know all of the exact zoning and everything, but we knew before we bought the property that, first of all, this was where the leaders felt by the Spirit that the temple should be. And so we listen to the Lord first, and then we make sure that legally we can do that. Sometimes the Lord confirms multiple sites, and then we make sure that we use the site that's legally viable before we announce it. So when we announce a project, we're usually very confident that we know where it is and everything's okay. Sometimes that changes after the fact with changes in municipality leadership or local laws, and we don't have anything to do with that.
Well, wouldn't the Lord be able to help in that? I mean, I think about the Fairview. It's called the McKinney Temple, but it's going to be built in the town of Fairview. And at the city council meeting or the planning commission meeting, or maybe one of the other meetings, they said, the Lord wanted the temple in Fairview. The leadership wanted the temple in Fairview. But of course, we know that it was originally announced as the Prosper Texas Temple in a whole other town. And then the town used eminent domain. It built a road through the temple site. And then suddenly it's somewhere else. So it's very interesting, because a lot of the argument is there's nothing we can do. Our hands are tied. The Lord wants it here. But we've seen over and over that that's not necessarily the truth. The Lord, his hands are tied by some of these, like Colin said, municipalities or a road or something like that. So there's way more wiggle room than they lead you to think. You really could find a site that's okay with everybody and avoid all of this.
Yeah. And so of course in my sidebar, I'm like, really, anything at all? Like, you'd have nothing to do with it? So
I love your sidebars. I picture you doing this. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, these sidebars are like way after the fact, right? They're like,
I know.
That just like recently, actually, when I dug this back up. But I do ask him, I say, in the case of Arequipa, do you know about multiple sites, or is this pretty much Colin? I do, but I can't tell you, laughs Jason. Colin, what happens is we have local people. We give them a criteria. They look for multiple sites, and then leadership comes down, and of the optional sites, they select one of those. Or sometimes they say, you know what? I don't feel any of these are correct. What else do we have? So
in other words, it's just like when you and I look for a house. Call a realtor, tell them what we want. The realtor comes back with 5 or 6 places. We go look at them and we pick the one we like best, or we say, no, none of these. Keep looking.
Yeah.
But it's a miracle in the church, and God is directing it. So.
Yeah. And then then he goes on to talk. They go on to talk about so the actual architect, the head architect of the temple, is there as well. He walks in on this interview, and there was something that happened. So there's this guy who worked. He's not a member of the church, but he's the lead of the Colombian subcontracting company that does the rock work for the facades of the temples, the rock facade, and that's where the Moroni miracle comes in. Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, yes. Let's hear it.
So
we love miracles about Moroni.
So Sawyer told me that one. He says, let's see. So Sawyer is actually he's kind of like, so I call them Elder and Sister Sawyer. They're actually construction site missionaries. So they're on a mission. And their mission is to basically have a spiritual feeling on the construction site among the non-member construction workers.
Yeah, I was reading that. They start out, and the construction workers, they're hired, they're under subcontract. They have to go do their job to get paid. And the church comes out and gives them a spiritual message, and they have to listen to it. Kind of
They have
sounds
to go
like
to
Satan's plan, you know, you have to listen to it.
they have to go to morning devotionals and stuff like that. And so anyway, Elder Sawyer says, and so that's what our job is, you know, it is to try to get that kind of feeling, not only with the members that are here, but with the people that are not members. Valentino's another example of just an incredible story that needs to be documented because even though he's not a member, I asked him, I said, "Are you excited to be here?" And he says, "Yes, we're building the house of the Lord." And you know, I want him to talk to all the employees because I want all of them to have that same perspective. So, um, okay, Valentino has got an incredible story on himself. Jason, oh, really? Is he a member of the church? Elder Sawyer, no. Sister Sawyer, he says, I don't smoke and I don't drink. And Elder Sawyer, he's faithful to his wife. Sister Sawyer, faithful to his wife for 30 years. Elder Sawyer, and I told him, I said, the only thing you lack is baptism. So we'll work on that while we. Now, before the Trujillo Temple, he told his boss he was going to retire from temple building and just dedicate himself to riding his motorcycle. Well, while riding it, he got in an accident and he lost his leg. Yeah, he's got a prosthetic leg from here down. You don't even know. And he says he talked to God while he was lying in the middle of the road in a pool of his own blood. And he told him, he said, I'll go back to work and do the temple in Trujillo if you'll heal me. And God, according to him, he tells the story. He says, God said, okay. Sister Sawyer laughs, Elder Sawyer. And so he went back and did Trujillo. He never told anybody he had a prosthetic leg. And when they put the angel Moroni on the top, he pulled Colin aside. He was the photographer there too, and basically pulled his pants down, exposed his prosthetic leg, and said, I just want you to hear my story. And he got so excited, he stayed and did Barranquilla, Colombia after Trujillo, and now he's here doing Arequipa. He's told me that when he gets done with this one, he's going to really retire, laughs. But back when he was shattered on the road and talked to God, he had 3 conditions for coming out of retirement. He says, God, you got to heal me. You got to heal me in time. And I've got to be able to ride my motorcycle after I'm done. He says, if you'll grant me those 3 things, I'll do the temple. Jason, and they were all fulfilled? Elder Sawyer, they were all fulfilled. Yeah. I wrote up the story because I thought it was so interesting that we shared it in one of our letters home a couple weeks ago. Yeah, so that's the Moroni.
Wow,
So there's a photograph which it's really blurry, but he had it as like his WhatsApp, basically his phone background image was him with his pants down and his prosthetic leg showing on the platform of Angel Moroni when it's like still being craned down on top of the Trujillo Temple, because and it goes to show that him and that Colin really is like one of the top guys on the construction site.
Wow. I'm surprised that we haven't heard that story in conference or something. I mean, it has everything that you would need. And again, I'm not discounting at all this gentleman's experience. I'm sure that it was really important to him. That's what, and I know, and I was going to ask you, the general feeling of the temples now, I'm sure that the members do feel that it's incredible to have these temples here. So we can't discount these experiences. They're very real to these people. Yeah. And it's why people come and work on them. It's why there's such a, that positive feeling. So, that story, that's kind of a cute story to me, even though it involves a motorcycle accident and blood and a dismembered leg. But no, I mean, to him, it's incredibly inspiring. And I'm guessing to a lot of faithful Mormons, that is an incredibly inspiring
and that's
story.
Probably, I kind of wanted to include that in this episode because I feel like I've been talking about this from my perspective.
Exactly.
In my book, which isn't at all like this, it's mostly from the perspective of faithful Peruvian Mormons, and because a lot of what the stories that they will tell about the neighbors around the temple is that during the open house, a lot of the neighbors were totally skeptical, like they hated it, like because it was actually in the city newspapers that there were protests against this temple, like so that all the members knew about that. But during the open house, the members tell all the good stories, about how people were so moved at the open house that they actually converted to Mormonism. Yeah. And there was a really old man. I think he was like 89 years old, and he swore he would never become Mormon. And he was like cursing the temple and everything. And he went to the open house, and had a spiritual experience and was baptized. And so there's amazing experiences.
Yeah, and I think those stories exist around almost every open house that we've heard of, and some may be accurate, some may be urban legends, but yeah, it's that idea. And we hear this all the time in all these towns where there are just such really sad, bad feelings now between, the residents who are saying, please, not in this location. And the members always say, you'll understand. Once it's built, you'll get it. It's a blessing. Once you go in there, you will understand. There's just this idea that just wait. And I think that's where these urban legends sort of spring up. Once you get inside there, you're going to know, and you might convert, but at least you'll understand what they were trying to say. So I think that exists. We've heard that a lot of places.
I love these faithful stories of, Mormon real estate god violently ripping off a man's leg so he'll come do the stucco on the temple.
Wow, Landon.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another way to look at it too,
Yeah, there's all kinds of
deal that God
ways,
made, that he'd had to do that to somebody in order to get him to come work on the temple.
Yeah, it takes a wake-up call, Landon. You have a motorcycle, knock on all wood. Who knows what's going to knock on wood. But so there is a large membership population, and they are able now to go to the temple where previously they had to travel days, it sounds like, to go. So, if it's needed there, I guess that's a positive side for the people, aside from everything else that we've talked about.
And I talked to Valentino himself a lot. I interviewed him on, I'll have to I haven't looked back at that transcript, but it was interesting how he talked about the temple. Like, it was just for him, it's the house of the Lord. Like, there's no, but there was also no desire on his part to join the church because of it. I mean,
interesting.
He didn't ever say that it was, Mormons believe that it's the house of the Lord. No, it's straight up, it's the house of the Lord, and we're building the house of the Lord. But he never made that connection. That's very common thought process, I think, in Latin America, is that multiple things can be true. Like, it's not a big deal. The Mormons, they're great. Their God has a temple right there. Cool.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm going to join it just because the God exists. But it's just a very different way of thinking about things, that you can hold multiple truths at once without them canceling each other out necessarily.
It's no different than the ancient world, where you would go and there would be multiple gods no matter what country you went to, and people from one culture just went into the other culture and said, yeah, that's a temple to their god, whoever. It's a temple. And they understood, they have temples, we have temples, that everyone had a temple, of some sort to their deity, and everyone accepted it. So it shouldn't be surprising that just because someone said, oh, that's your church, that you've consecrated that to the Lord. Okay, that's the house of the Lord, just like the Catholic Church is the house of the Lord, and any other structure that someone could build could be a house of the Lord. Doesn't mean that Mormons, as soon as someone says that, it's like, oh, they're going to join the church. They think it's true, because someone said that.
Yeah, and sometimes they do join the church, but they don't understand it as being exclusive. They kind of, you'll ask people, that happened a lot. I went on a mission to Bolivia, and we would baptize people and then find out that they'd already been baptized. And they're like, oh yeah, I was a Mormon before, and I was also Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, everything, what's the problem with that?
Cover your bases.
Yeah.
But I like that perspective better. And honestly, it was not until historically Christianity that they said, oh no other God, right? Before it was just like, okay, this and that, and everyone's respected. Christianity kind of did that there's only one. So very interesting. Well,
but anyway, that's adventure number 7.
Adventure number 7.
It actually does continue on, but there's
so much. No, I think this is a good stopping place. I think there's a lot to think about here. This has just been amazing. I mean, we knew sort of the bare bones of what you were going to talk about, but this has exceeded expectations and given us so much to think about. And I like to think that we have 6 other adventures that we can have you back on to talk about. This is great. And especially after your book comes out, give our viewers and listeners a chance to kind of read through, and then, maybe get some feedback on what they'd like to hear about. But do you have any last thoughts, Landon? This has just been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much just about, Peru in general. And then of course, these workings behind the scenes and just everything. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Jason sent us the this transcript that he had transcribed from his interview, and I was reading it, and I was just, it was fun. I was jumping around all over going, oh my gosh, listen to this, listen to that. This is what we thought would probably happen or could have happened. And here it is right here in black and white. They're saying it, and the really cool part is they're giving an interview to someone who they believe is their same faith, which you were.
Which you are,
and they're sharing openly their thoughts
and you still are. That's right.
Without holding it back, and so you're getting a true perspective of what they think and how they do things, and so it's kind of interesting to sit back and watch and see how this all unfolds.
Yeah.
You see how the sausage is made, right?
See how the sausage is made. That's right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually have another interview with Colin where he talks about that. He actually uses the phrase, once I saw how the sausage was made. And he had a very deep conversation with me about what he called being in part of the corporate side of the church.
Right.
All of a sudden, whereas he grew up with the spiritual side and like seeing how horrible decisions are made within a church that's supposed to be run by God. And so I hope if Colin, the person who I'm calling Colin, is listening to this, he doesn't have any hard feelings and he doesn't regret talking to me. But yeah, because I think I give him a much more fair portrayal in my book. So
well, sorry, we appreciate Colin too. No, I think we've learned a lot, and we have respect for everything that he's doing, and he seems like he's very fair and balanced in everything that he's saying. And of course, he's doing a job and he's working for a certain organization. And of course, you have allegiance there. And then, of course, you have your faith that, is there with the allegiance. So we understand all perspectives. That's why our show is called Mormonish. We get it. We're Mormon, we're post-Mormon, we're Mormon-ish. We understand all sides of it.
Just like Jason said, he had to go from one role into another. Colin's doing the same thing. He's representing the church. He's a construction manager or whatever he is. He's got to get the temple built. That's what he's paid for to do. And so he's got to walk the church line. So he's probably doing that as well. And he may or may not. We don't know if he believes what he's saying or not necessarily, because he may have a different opinion. But when he's speaking as in the role that he's doing, there's things that you say that you're representing who you're working for and not necessarily your own opinion. So they could be his full blown opinion. He may have other opinions. He's slipping in and out just like all of us do. So
and in my book, I'm just as critical of myself as I right now in this episode have been of Colin, like as far as like what I'm calling the colonizer mindset. That's why in my introduction I said that I was a settler anthropologist. I recognize I am participating in the colonization of right now the Norel Mukwintu nation, and I'm complicit in that, and so I'm very critical of myself, and I understand Colin a little bit more because of that. So
no,
anyway,
absolutely fabulous. I know, I feel like we could talk for hours. I also just love your background so much. I'm just kind of like mesmerized by it. It looks so peaceful. We want to come over. What's your address, Jason?
Well, if I show you the floor, like the floor is like, so it looks like the set of Stranger Things. It's like 1980s linoleum and shag carpeting, and
that's great.
That's why we're sticking to the ceiling.
Even more charm. That's exactly right. Well, this has just turned out to be incredible. And I absolutely know that our viewers and listeners are going to just love this episode. And as I said, we're going to have Jason on again, probably after his book is out for a little bit, because there's so much more to unpack here and learn from Jason and just his perspective. And we appreciate that so much. You do see all sides of it. You're an anthropologist, a member of the church. You understand it and you see it and you help us learn from that. So I absolutely love that. So please comment. Has anybody ever heard anything about the Peru Temple, or did you serve your mission in Peru? Do you know anything about this? It's absolutely fascinating. And I also want to encourage everybody to go out and get Jason's book, because as he said, there's much more there. This is just this is the tip of the iceberg, I feel like. And I also feel like maybe in your book, there isn't even everything. You might have to write a series, Jason.
Yeah.
Or
I have
something.
the sealed portion. I'll
The
have
sealed
to
portion of Jason's book. That's exactly it. So, no, this is just great. Such a fascinating topic. So, please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit the notification bell. If you'd like to help financially support Mormonish Podcast, we always have links in the show notes to Venmo and PayPal, and also to mormonishpodcast.org. And we really appreciate everybody who does help the podcast financially. We literally and honestly cannot continue to do this without financial help from all of you. So we just appreciate you so much. We also have a link to our merch store. If you would like, hold it up, Landon, a Mormonish mug or sweatshirt or t-shirt or water bottle or hat. Oh, look, Landon has something else. Oh, that's nice. When did you get that? I like that. That looks good.
Yeah.
There you go. You'll have to wear that next time and model it. I think that looks really good.
When it's 85 degrees outside. Yes.
Yeah, well, okay, it's the middle of the summer. You're right. So anyway, link to the merch store there. And we'll just say again, thank you so much to Landon for co-hosting and to Jason for being on. This has been amazing. And we'll see Jason again. And we'll see all of you guys again next time on Mormonish. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.